So here's the thing. DC Universe was just not for me. It was too expensive and it was way too specific for me to have a total interest in it. So just like Disney Plus, I kind of mooched off my friends to watch what I personally needed to watch. And I have some really mixed feeling on the DC Universe originals. I haven't seen Swamp Thing and Stargirl. Young Justice Season 3 was kind of a mixed bag for me. It might be its own video one day. Harley Quinn, gun to my head, is probably my favorite show on television right now. And Titans, gun to my head, is one of my least favorite things ever made.
Fuck Batman.
However, both of those last two shows have elements that are kind of mixed. Titans has some good things that are just swallowed by how bad it is as an end product, and Harley Quinn has some things that I'm not super comfortable with that are ultimately consumed by just how much fun it is to watch. But one show, a show I unambiguously love, a show I am here to praise with no restraint, is Doom Patrol. I love Doom Patrol, sincerely, with all my heart, with my entire being, with every cell in my body. I love Doom Patrol. And when Critical Rants came out on Twitter and announced that he wanted to do a big collaboration with the sole purpose of explaining why this show is so awesome, I had to jump on it. So once you're done watching this video, go watch his video, watch TroyoBoyo17's video, watch every video we are doing on Doom Patrol, and then make your own Praise Patrol video. Talk about why this show is fucking awesome, and do it in your own voice with your own style, and then hit us up on Twitter and we'll add it to the playlist. And before we begin, I acknowledge that Doom Patrol draws a lot of inspiration from Grant Morrison's run. This isn't necessarily new for me, but I have absolutely no interest in discussing how the show relates to Morrison's book, and I intend to examine Doom Patrol as a singular piece of media. I will, however, say that from what I understand, Morrison's work with the characters is heavily influenced by the fact that they, for the last 50 years, have been non-binary. Now, I am a major proponent of having writers around in comic book media that can offer perspectives beyond just white cis males, because that's a perspective that's dominated media for the entirety of its lifespan, and particularly comic book media, being known for predominantly starring and being written and produced by cis white males. TLDR, I really want Morrison to cameo in Season 3 and definitely write an episode or two. Preferably a Danny the Street-centric episode, because the stories that a Danny episode can tell are particularly suited to the kinds of stories that Morrison is apparently known for when writing Doom Patrol. Moving on. What are we here to talk about? What specifically am I praising about this show? Well, I never really had an attachment to the source material. Most of what I know about the Doom Patrol comes from all those 10 characters Marvel stole from DC videos, their appearances in Teen Titans, and that funny Teen Titans Ghost sketch in Young Justice Season 3. But here's the thing, that can often help, with the way that, say, Alfonso Cuarón made Prisoner of Azkaban without having read a single Harry Potter book or having seen any of the movies, or the way that the Russo brothers didn't love Captain America as a character when they were making Winter Soldier. I think a detachment from the source material can help you realize what you emotionally respond to in something that you don't particularly care for beforehand. And trust me, Doom Patrol is nothing but emotional response after emotional response. Hell, this show almost got me to cry 5 times on my second watch of Season 1. And as I continued to delve into that rewatch, a single thought dawned on me. Holy shit, this is exactly what Titans was supposed to be. So if you know me in my personal life, you know I loathe Titans, and you've probably heard me go off about it at least once. And if you don't, well, go look at High Top Films, because he's made 4 videos on it, and I don't have the time in this video to do that swan dive down the rabbit hole. But every blue-tinted box that Titans leaves empty, Doom Patrol fills with some of the most beautiful colors in the genre. So I want to briefly go through what a Teen Titans show should have, the things that Titans failed in, and how Doom Patrol directly responds to those requirements. Now, I am a huge Teen Titans fan. The second cosplay I ever made was Robin. The Teen Titans theme is probably my favorite superhero show theme ever, and Teen Titans is probably my 3rd favorite superhero show ever, behind maybe Spectacular Spider-Man and Gotham. And I think the Titans are probably some of the most interesting characters that the DC Universe has to offer. So, a lot like with some of my other favorite characters, namely Spider-Man, I spend a lot of time thinking about how I would write these characters, just as sort of a general thing, a set of rules. I know that my version of a character may not be yours, so please take this with a grain of salt. But here's the three things that I personally think a good Teen Titans show or story needs: a timeless sense of humor, incredibly complex characters, and a fluid villain. Let me explain all those. A timeless sense of humor is pretty standard, but particularly important to a team of teenagers. The idea of writing all teenagers to be modern usually results in meme references and making them awkward as a motherfucker, which, yeah, that's kind of how teenagers are, I would know, but the core of teenagers throughout the centuries usually remains the same. Most of us are in pain, confused as all hell, and beginning to discover who we are, and we're usually all masking it by being an asshole, usually a pretty funny asshole, and it's usually at someone else's expense. So maintain a good sense of humor, but don't make it reliant on memes. Make it more situational comedy that teenagers would be able to relate to. Having complex characters is also pretty basic, so I'll leave that one alone. I assume if you're watching this, you should know what a complex character is. A fluid villain is a bit more complicated. What I mean by this is, ideally, the villain here should be able to pose as a physical threat if needed, but mostly operates through mind games, secondary villains, and other things like that. Just because you can fight the heroes head on doesn't mean you always have to. So how does Titans fail in these regards? Honestly, pretty spectacularly, and that's me being nice. To start with, the main villain in Season 1 is barely present, and in Season 2 we do get a slightly more active villain in Deathstroke, I will give them that, but it ends up going all to shit when they sub him out for Cadmus in the show's finale. The characters aren't even remotely complex, and when they do try and do something complex, it's confusing. Most of them get really nothing to do, and there's minimal character development for outside of anyone other than Dick Grayson, who might be the worst written and most confusing protagonist I have ever seen in anything. Like, okay, most people know I don't really like Captain Marvel, but she in her movie is not a particularly well written or strong character, but at least it's consistent from scene to scene, and it carries over into her appearance in Endgame. Even if I'm not particularly a fan of the way she's written, Dick Grayson is just... and the humor... High Top Films? Yeah, Alex has like 4 videos on why this show sucks, and he speaks at great length as to why some potentially funny jokes are actually let down by poor editing, which, go watch those. Why are you listening to me? Okay, enough bashing bad DC show. Time for perfect DC show. Doom Patrol is really funny. That's it. That's the tweet. I know humor is subjective and all, and it's definitely not going to be for everyone. Some of the humor is a little crass. Don't watch it with your parents if you're a young adult living at home. But for the most part, Doom Patrol has some really strong situational comedy. That's mostly what it relies on. And most of it isn't even overtly comedic. Like, it doesn't feel like certain movies in the MCU where the characters are being blatantly funny for the audience's sake. It's more just that the characters have a fair sense of humor about their situations. The actor's delivery is generally what I'd cite as the biggest part of why the humor works. My only real complaint with the comedy is Cliff in Season 2. Brendan Fraser's delivery seems off because he is just really screaming a lot of his lines most of the time. But some of my favorite comedic beats from him come from his really low voice in Season 1. I'll give him a pass though, because he is generally still pretty funny. By far the funniest member of the cast to me is Larry. His comedic beats can range from really small, simple bits with a very dry tone, like...
Just walk up the goddamn steps, okay?
So walk up the goddamn steps.
To a more overtly comedic...
What?
Oh, I'm just marveling at your embrace of the weird and utterly impossible.
Pretty much every character has at least one good comedic beat that I would say is particularly memorable. But none of this comedy would mean a damn thing if the characters weren't as complex as they are. Now, having complex characters in a story is not new, but having incredibly complex characters in a superhero show is a modern-day rarity, especially given the competition.
Fuck Batman.
It's kind of hard to talk about this one without spoilers, but I will do my best. This is mostly because the show heavily communicates its narrative through flashbacks, kind of like Arrow. But it does it in fairly organic ways, unlike the last few seasons of Arrow. Getting back on track, I think that Doom Patrol has maybe the most strongly written TV superheroes ever. Like, ever. A small detail, but the main thing that grounds these characters is that they're almost exclusively referred to by their real names. Cyborg is the exception, but that's kind of part of his character. He's the big city superhero who, while he's still going through his own shit, as we all inevitably are, stands as the shining example of what the Doom Patrol could be if they actually got past their trauma and could put up with each other. It's got real strong Guardians of the Galaxy vibes. For the most part, they fucking hate each other, but they view each other as family and aren't afraid to express that. Hell, part of Jane's arc in Season 2 is that her alters don't really understand why Jane gives a fuck about anyone and anything beyond Kay. The big twist at the end of Season 1, I think, perfectly sums up what the show is to me. All these characters were garbage, and maybe some of them still are garbage. Their relationships, for the most part, can be pretty toxic, and they get very cross with one another because they're all victims of trauma and abuse who are trying to make sense of things through each other and the Chief. So when that twist comes, when the grand illusion of what their Doom Patrol means is shattered, it has weight and a little more emotional honesty than I'm personally comfortable with. Seriously, I cried like 5 or 6 times in these 24 episodes, which might just be me projecting a little and just being generally depressed while watching a show that can be a little genuinely depressing, but nothing feels out of pocket when these characters behave in toxic ways. It feels like a genuine emotional reaction that would come as a result of their respective endured trauma. Jane in particular, as her alters are all psychological manifestations of the needs that a young girl who suffered way more trauma in her childhood than any one person ever should. However, all the characters are written like this. Every single character has clear wants and needs that all stem from their personalities, which stem from who they were, what they've lost, and what they strive to be. I know all of this sounds like Film School 101, but in a genre that often gets by on grand stakes and snarky, smarmy characters, it is just a total shock to the system to have characters that actually have a full range of complex emotions and developed emotional backstories that inform personality traits, both good and bad. Which means, and I've been waiting the entire video to say this, Doom Patrol is cinema. But of course, none of these super zeros would be worth a shit without a god-tier supervillain to fight, and oh my god, I have never been more blown away by the ultimate super zero, my A1 since day one, Alan Tudyk as the mismatched Mr. Nobody! Ugh. Mr. Nobody may very well be my favorite live-action DC villain ever. I say this with the existence of Ledger and Phoenix's Jokers, Hardy's Bane, McGregor's Black Mask, and Spacey's Luthor.
WRONG!
He's not particularly deep or complex. The last few episodes bring in a little bit of backstory for him, but it's just enough to make you see why he is who he is, exactly the way it's done for the Doom Patrol in the pilot. However, unlike them, it's never really developed beyond more than a few flashbacks and some, illusions. His use of constant fourth wall breaking narration is a genuine stroke of genius, and an accomplishment of the writing because it somehow never feels lazy or inorganic. He's also just really funny, but that's because he's Alan Tudyk. He can read anything and make it funny.
Women aren't funny.
By far, the thing he does best is exist as a really fluid antagonist, who never really poses a physical threat to the Doom Patrol. He even goes out of his way to poke fun at the seeming necessity for a big hero-villain showdown for the finale, but ultimately his conflict is kind of resolved off-screen in a small handful of shots. Granted, there is a bit of a typical superhero finale in the last episode of Season 1, but it's mostly played for comedy. Mr. Nobody could absolutely wipe the floor with the Doom Patrol, but never does, because that's not his game. He really just wants to fuck with them. I really want to talk about the villain of Season 2 because I think it's particularly interesting, but unfortunately, Season 2 technically isn't over yet. Much like Titans Season 1, Doom Patrol Season 2 made the decision to end the series on a cliffhanger by cutting what was intended to be the final episode and making it end on the penultimate episode. But, unlike Titans, Doom Patrol had a really good reason. The pandemic started before they had a chance to film the finale, so I fully expect them to make the finale proper be the premiere of Season 3, which has already been confirmed with a release date expected late 2021. And Lord knows when it comes out, I will be ready and waiting, because I unambiguously, with all my heart, love Doom Patrol.